Well, in this session, I want to deal with this question with you. And in handling a topic that is emotionally as loaded as this one is, I think it's really important that we make a number of distinctions to keep our thinking about it clear. So, first of all, I think we need to differentiate between the intellectual problem of suffering and the emotional problem of suffering. Now, do we have a diagram of that? Yes, here we go. The intellectual problem of suffering concerns whether it's plausible to think that God and suffering in the world can coexist. What is the rational account of the compatibility of God and suffering? The emotional problem of suffering concerns people's dislike of a God who would permit terrible suffering. And I think it's very important that we keep these two versions of the problem distinct, because the answer to the intellectual problem is apt to appear dry and uncaring to the person who's really suffering emotionally as a result of the suffering in the world. On the other hand, the answer to the emotional problem is apt to appear superficial and unsatisfactory to someone who's contemplating it as a purely philosophical question. Now, I'm convinced that for most people, the terrible suffering in the world is not really an intellectual problem, but an emotional problem. I think that their unbelief is born not out of refutation, but rather simply out of rejection. They just don't like a God who would permit them or others to suffer terribly, and so they just want nothing to do with them. But in order to support this claim that the problem of suffering is really an emotional problem, we need to examine in some detail the intellectual problem of suffering in order to show that it fails as a disproof of the existence of God.